December 8th, 1891, Sparrows Point, Maryland. Arthur Austin is 21 years old, 3 months on the job. By morning, they'll find him 60 feet from Furnace B. What remains, the Baltimore Sun will describe in 4 words: burnt to a crisp. Everyone at Sparrows Point knew where danger lived. Molten iron, open flame, the cast house floor at 130 degrees. But the explosion that killed Austin didn't happen while the furnace was running. It happened during its shutdown, a controlled blowout. The procedure designed to make things safer. The real killer had no color, no smell, no temperature you could feel. It was gas. Foreman David Baker was on the roof when the blowout neared completion. He felt it, air moving inward, not outward. 20 years in this work had taught him what that meant. Where air enters and unvented gas accumulates, explosion follows. He knew. He stayed. He miscalculated the volume, not from carelessness, from experience that had never encountered this concentration. He figured it manageable. A section of roofing near him lifted into the dark sky. He and his crew survived. The men below did not. The blast tore horizontally from the furnace openings, straight into the open ground between buildings. 4 didn't walk away. Arthur Austin, 21, killed instantly. George Braidwood, 35, burns across his body, died Monday morning, left a widow. John Lynch, 30, fractured skull, dead at 6 a.m. in the company medical station. Andrew Paw, age unknown, burns on half his body, dead the following evening, left a wife and an infant with no name in any document. Sparrows Point was not a town beside a mill. It was a mill around which a town had grown. The barracks were Maryland Steels. The stores were Maryland Steels. The medical station where Lynch died, Maryland Steels. When word moved through the neighborhood that night, it moved without words. People stepped onto their porches, saw the glow, and understood. The next morning, the mill opened. Workers came to their shifts, not because they weren't afraid, but because in a company town, not showing up means losing your job and your roof at once. Maryland Steel's management knew about cracked piping near the Bosch and damaged fire brick before the blowout order. How much time passed between that discovery and the shutdown command? The records don't say. The Baltimore Sun called it a sudden and unaccountable disaster. The company's furnace log already held entries on equipment condition. Those records never appeared at the inquest. Not because anyone destroyed them, because nobody asked. The inquest jury included a foreman from a neighboring shop and a blast furnace master, both tied to Maryland Steel. The hearing lasted 20 minutes. Verdict: cause unknown, company not at fault. To understand why the furnace went at the moment everyone believed was safest, you need to understand what happens inside a blast furnace when the air starts moving the wrong way. Furnace B stood 4 stories tall. From 10 steps away, air supply off, everything quiet. You didn't feel warmth. You felt the wall, a slow heat that found gaps in your clothing. The hum wasn't sound. It was vibration in your back teeth. Inside, columns of iron ore, limestone, and coke stacked dozens of feet high. Tuyeres at the base, pipes as thick as a man's forearm, blasted preheated air in under pressure. Coke burned to 1,500 degrees and beyond. Iron melted, ran to the hearth, moved like heavy water, orange, glowing through cracks in the shell. Slag floated on top and smelled of sulfur until you stopped noticing. Then the wind shifted and you noticed again. The Bosch, widest section, hottest zone, is where fire brick fails first and piping wears out ahead of schedule. In December 1891, cracks were there. Everyone saw them. A blowout is not switching off. Air supply is reduced gradually. Charging stops, molten metal tapped out, temperature drops. The roar gives way to pops and clicks. It sounds almost calm. Coke combustion produces carbon monoxide throughout the burn, colorless, odorless. While furnace pressure exceeds outside air, the gas stays contained. When that balance tips, air finds the smallest gap and enters. Near walls still hot enough to ignite CO, no flame is needed, only the temperature of the bricks. That is what Baker felt as a draft moving inward. The furnace wasn't exhaling, it was inhaling. Every written rule at the mill addressed visible hazard: tap hole, cast house floor, molten ladle. The invisible danger of blowout gas at the moment everyone believed the process was already safe had no name in any Maryland Steel document of that era. It wasn't the furnace that killed them, it was stopping the furnace. The cracks around the Bosch had been noticed for weeks. The shift foreman knew and said nothing, not from indifference, but from the arithmetic of the place. Reporting a fault meant reassignment at lower pay or questions about why you'd been silent until now. Both were worse than waiting for the scheduled inspection. He waited. Everyone before him had. Baker knew the pipe condition from inspection logs. 3 years at Sparrows Point without a serious blowout incident. 3 years of quiet is the most dangerous evidence that a system is working. The Wood brothers had just smelted the first steel in Maryland's history. Shipbuilding contracts. Pennsylvania mills already years ahead. Every unscheduled stoppage sent a signal to shareholders, buyers, competitors. Stopping early meant explanation. Explanation meant admitting the problem. That chain led nowhere anyone wanted to go. Maryland had no law requiring compensation for workers killed on the job, not in 1891. That law came in 1914, 23 years, and an uncounted number of deaths later. The question isn't what killed them. That's settled. The question is what Maryland Steel did with the fact of their deaths and what they were worth on the books. Monday, December 14th, 1891. Baltimore Circuit Court. Mrs. Braidwood files suit against Maryland Steel for $10,000. She doesn't know the question is already settled. The inquest met 6 days earlier, sat in the company office, and reached its verdict in 20 minutes. Cause unknown, company not at fault. Everyone assumed the injustice was straightforward. The company knew about the cracks and didn't act, but the deeper injustice was legally impeccable. Maryland had no statute requiring employers to compensate families of men killed on the job. None. Even if Maryland Steel had admitted fault, the families had no legal claim. Mrs. Braidwood didn't file expecting to win. She filed because there was nothing else. Arthur Austin, 21, 3 months here. Company paid his travel from Pennsylvania and deducted it from his first paycheck. He was still paying it back. His family received a telegram. No record indicates it was shipped home. George Braidwood, 35, experienced enough to recognize a dangerous furnace. He didn't make the call. The son wrote of him separately. Suffered horribly. He died in the company medical station. His wife will file without an attorney. John Lynch, 30, fractured skull, dead at 6 a.m. Whether he could speak in those hours, the son did not say. His name appears in print once. Andrew Paw, age unknown, burns across half his body, dead the following evening. Left a wife and an infant. The infant has no name in any document. At Sparrows Point, local citizens meant people who lived in Maryland Steel's housing, bought from Maryland Steel's store, and worked for Maryland Steel or for men who did. Maryland law required an inquest for suspicious workplace deaths. The jury included a foreman from a neighboring shop and a blast furnace master. 20 minutes. Frederick Wood testified personally. He suggested the cause was a water leak through cracked piping near the Bosch. Not gas, water. Neutral, technical, pointing at no one. He didn't lie. He simply didn't say everything. That difference in 1891 carried no legal consequence. The company made voluntary payments to the families. Amounts don't survive in any document. Based on comparable settlements, 3 months' wages. At $1 a day, that's $90. Repair of the Bosch piping costs considerably more, but repair requires explaining to a board. $90 to a widow is the president's discretion. No ledger line. One name is missing from the official 4. Robert Tippett, Maryland Steel's boiler inspector, injured in the same explosion, dead the following morning. No record explains why. Perhaps complications, perhaps a different ledger. No document contradicts the count of 4. None confirms it is complete. The explosion lasted 20 minutes. The inquest, lasted 20 minutes. The suit will disappear into the court files. The question is what Maryland Steel actually changed, not on paper, but in brick and pipe. After December 1891, no new blowout protocol appears in any Maryland Steel document. No new evacuation rule, no pipe inspection requirement before shutdown. Baker remembered and presumably told someone. Informal rules last as long as the person who carries them. Everyone studying industrial disasters of this era expects the same villain, an owner trading lives for tonnage. The Wood brothers weren't that. They operated within a system where safety had no budget line, no inspector with real authority, and no legal consequence when something went wrong. They ran it as designed. That's precisely why it kept killing. In 1891, the American steel industry kept no unified accident record. Each company's ledger answered to no one. Maryland had no state labor inspector with authority over mills of this type. If Sparrows Point logged 4 deaths instead of 40, no one verified it. The true scale became visible only in 1907 to 1910, when Pittsburgh survey researchers published the first independent count. At a single Carnegie steel mill, up to 250 workers died per year. The shift foreman who knew about the cracks appears in no document after December 8th. He didn't testify, not because anyone suppressed him, because the inquest didn't ask who knew and stayed silent. It asked what happened technically and whether the company was legally liable. If a name was needed, there was operator error. This time, unknown cause was enough. He kept working after the explosion, or was let go quietly. No record distinguishes between them. Maryland Steel reported to Pennsylvania Steel's board, whose metric was tonnage and cost per ton. In the chain cracked brick to repair to downtime to lost contract, a worker's death wasn't a link. It wasn't in that chain at all. There was a separate column. It was small. Workers' compensation legislation was introduced in Maryland through the 1890s and failed each time. The argument: it would disadvantage Maryland relative to Pennsylvania and Ohio, where no equivalent existed. Every state waited for the others. Maryland's law passed in 1914. In 1888, 3 years before the explosion, the Maryland legislature gave Maryland Steel full control over the town of Sparrows Point, teachers, prices, local justice, the constable. 3 years after that, Austin's body was found 60 feet from the furnace. No official document places those two facts in the same sentence. The 1890 strike, 84 workers against conditions, failed. The company replaced strikers with men who came cheaper and knew the equipment less. Some of them were near Furnace B on December 8, 1891. No investigator connected those facts. They were simply never placed in the same row. Maryland Steel survived December 1891 without legal consequence, without legislative change, and without a scandal that lasted a week. But corporate verdicts don't reach everything. What a community remembers and what it quietly lets go is a different kind of record. Monday, December 9th, 1891, 6 in the morning. Furnace A and Furnace C kept running. Furnace B stood open, a repair crew pulling damaged fire brick. 2 steps from where Austin was found the previous night, someone set a shovel down and started work. Nobody recorded his name. Nobody asked whether he wanted to be there. Industrial disasters are supposed to generate protest. December 1891 at Sparrows Point was the reverse. 4 dead, 20-minute inquest. No law changed, mill running within a day. That was the standard. The real change came more than a decade later, not from one explosion, but from accumulation. The trigger wasn't a blast. It was a number. After the explosion, Sparrows Point went quiet in 3 distinct ways. Mrs. Braidwood's suit disappeared into the court files without news. Andrew Paw's wife and infant don't appear in any subsequent record. Company towns leave no trace of women who leave. The workers' silence came from knowledge, not fear. The 1890 strike had settled the cost, job and roof, simultaneously. It traveled crew to crew. The The cracks had been there a month, Baker knew. Someone was told to say nothing. The oral record is more accurate than the corporate report. It has no legal weight. The press closed in 2 days. No new fact, no story, and no one was obligated to provide one. Baker returned to work, or didn't. No document records the company's assessment. He was the only man at Sparrows Point who had witnessed a blowout of this scale and survived. Younger workers would ask him informally. His knowledge stayed oral, with no written system to receive it. Through the 1890s and 1900s, deaths at Sparrows Point appeared regularly in the Sun. One day in print, then gone. None triggered legislation individually. Together, they became the record. When Maryland compensation hearings opened in 1907, newspaper archives carried hundreds of notices filed under local items. Frank Braxton died at Sparrows Point in November 1888, struck by a crane boom, 3 years before the furnace explosion. The Baltimore County Union ran a notice marked colored. In 1888 Maryland, that designation meant fewer questions, fewer hearings, fewer records. Braxton is the first documented workplace death at Sparrows Point, not because he died first, because he's the only one whose death was classified at all. Bethlehem Steel acquired the plant in 1916 and introduced an employee representation plan, a corporate grievance channel, in place of an independent union. Workers could file complaints. Anything substantive was filtered. The union didn't arrive until 1941, 51 years after the failed strike of 1890. Sparrows Point survived 5 owners and 125 years of production. In 2012, it closed, not from a blast, but from bankruptcy. The last furnace stopped without a draft, without gas, without flame. One detail connects December 1891 to December 2014, and it involves what was done with the last furnace standing. December 2014, Sparrows Point, Maryland, blast, Furnace L, has stood dark for 2 years, 320 feet tall, one of the largest ever built in North America. 10,000 tons of steel per day at peak. Thousands of former workers know it by touch. Heat off the shell even cold, ground vibration at a cast, sulfur smell that clung to work clothes for days. Controlled demolition ink will bring it down in seconds. The standard reading is deindustrialization, global competition, cheap imports, shareholder math. True. But the plant that closed in 2012 ran on the same logic that killed Austin in 1891. Not the same technology that changed completely. The same logic of human cost. Danger persists exactly as long as it's cheaper than the alternative. The market stopped the plant. The market didn't answer the question left in December 1891. The steel from Sparrows Point is in things. Hull plating on U.S. Navy ships in World War II. The suspension cables of the Golden Gate Bridge. Railroad rails across the eastern seaboard at the turn of the century. Skyscrapers, bridges, docks, pipes through which water still runs in old American cities. On May 31, 2012, RG Steel declared bankruptcy. 2,100 workers lost their jobs in a single day, descendants of those who had arrived in the 1890s. They didn't know Austin's name. They knew the mill the same way he had. The heat, the smell, the sound that gives 1 second's warning before something goes wrong. The town of Sparrows Point was demolished in 1974. Bethlehem Steel needed the land for expansion. Schools, stores, houses, leveled. Residents received a notice and a deadline. What remains is 3,100 acres, Trade Point Atlantic, and the memory carried out of the ruins. In December 2014, steelworker veterans took bricks from Furnace L, an entire wall, one piece at a time. Their fathers had laid identical bricks by hand, without gloves, at $1 a day on a 12-hour shift. The Baltimore Museum of Industry holds oral testimony from workers who were there. None remembered December 1891. Those witnesses were dead before anyone thought to record them. What survives of Furnace B? One newspaper account, a 20-minute inquest, a few corporate lines, 4 names. 8 words about Austin. Burnt to a crisp, found 60 feet from the furnace. Every December before the closure, Furnace L lit the Bethlehem Star, a metal structure on a column visible across Baltimore. After 2012, volunteers kept it lit for 2 more years on an empty floor. The last time was December 2014, the night before the demolition. On December 8, 1891, the Sun called it a sudden and unaccountable disaster. In 2012, the same paper wrote about the end of an era. Both were true. Neither asked about the chain between them, between Austin at 21 and the 2,100 workers who lost everything in a single morning. 121 years of the same calculation made differently each decade, always in the same direction.